Hi, it's Dew, and this is going to be my reading wrap-up video. It's been a great weekish of reading, and I'm just going to start by talking about the last of the Arab American Heritage Month TBR books that I was able to finish up. I got a couple of Asian American Heritage Month books off done, not the TBR, and then there's just a couple books that I've been wanting to get to for a while and was able to get to. So let's start, from the first book that probably that I finished, and that's Crescent by Diana Abu Jaber. I mostly listened to this and did read some out of this physical. This book, if I'm not mistaken, was published in the 1990s. Nope, it's 2003. Its setting is in the 90s. It's pre-September 11th, and the setting is West LA in the Arab and Persian American communities. It's the sort of like center of the setting is a cafe, and I like books that do that. And for all intents and purposes, this is a romance. Although it's not only a romance. Romance definitely takes the center of the story, and then woven along with it or running parallel to it is like a fable that is happening as well. I don't necessarily love romances, and I say that all the time, but I thought this one mostly worked. I thought the romance, I thought it was honest, and there were some really romanticized pieces, but not overly romanticized pieces. There's a lot of real, like, this is reality, and there was enough other substance going on. The main character, the female love interest, as this is a hetero book. I liked how we got in her head a little, but I fell a little short on the development of her personality. I couldn't really figure out what her personality was, except for through this romance, and I criticized that a little. But I highly recommend. Diana Abu Jaber teaches in Portland, Oregon, and I would recommend this book to folks who like I would consider a very contemporary fiction of the time of Western LA, and just a look at the Arab American community in that place. And we just have like a look at identity and what makes up identity as well in this book. Although that's like, it's running along with a romance. So we get some conversations of that. We get some, background of the political and social political situation in Iraq in the late 1990s. And I can recommend this book to folks who like contemporary fiction with a little bit of romance, and like to look at what the communities are like in specific places and times, and contextualized. I thought it did a great job of that. Speaking of communities and places and times, a book I read a little bit later, but on my Arab American Heritage Month TBR, is Behind the Sea by Susan Moodie Daraj. And this is interconnected short stories about a Palestinian American community in Baltimore. So we're on the other side, and it is the time of the setting is 2020s. So, well, it goes across time actually, but it feels a little bit more contemporary. That being said, I'm trying to remember if there's anything, like there's malls and stuff mentioned, so maybe I'm wrong about that. Let me get to what I liked about the book. I did feel like some of the short stories were really, really solid. And I do like interconnected short stories that take us through, like, especially when we're weaving the tapestry of a community and showing how communities are made of a bunch of individuals with diverse intersectional identities, ideologies, and backgrounds that also have plenty of things in common. And I really thought that this author did really it was a fantastic conversation to remind folks that, even inside of families, we have some differences in ideologies, and so to realize the complexity of humanity and not create monoliths or stereotypical understandings of groups of people, but also to embrace what does bring communities together. I particularly like the last story where we end up in Palestine, and it's a look at what it's like to kind of be displaced from your origins. And I really appreciated how in the last story, our main character, who is estranged from his father and didn't have a whole lot of respect for his father, got to see his father through a new light. And I like very much to explore the ideas of children of immigrants, children of, like, generations don't really fully understand what the generations before them went through, because they have their new and contemporary challenges, and supposed to move forward in ways. And in any case, I can recommend this book to anyone who appreciates interconnected short stories and likes to look at communities and how they all work together. Next was a book that was fun. It was a romantasy, which is not my genre at all, and I can say that, but I like to read outside of my genres. I like to read diversely in all ways possible. So I tried Feybound by Sara El-Arife. Because I'm not a romantasy reader, I don't feel like I have a lot of words of substance to say to folks that are. They know what they like and don't like inside of romantasy, and there were some things that really worked for this. I thought that, again, fantasy leaves, a lot of space for authors to really confront, maybe even safely, but to confront, these ubiquitous issues that, and themes that humanity grapples with all of the time. And in this, we're looking at what it's like to, be allies or lovers or friends with folks of cultures that are, or nationalities or groups that are enemies. So it really looks at that, at war and the impact of war, and of, what love can or cannot overcome. And in some ways, does it matter to the lovers? I think it covers all of those in, a fun, page-turny, propulsive way. I have a friend's daughter, actually, who likes world building, and I'm not that into it, hence not a fantasy and definitely not a romance reader, and definitely appreciate sapphic material. So I'm happy to move this on to them, and I would be very happy to talk about this book with them when they're finished reading it, because I'd like to know what they kind of liked or didn't like, based on the opinion of someone who reads the genre a lot more than I do. Bridging the gap from Arab American Heritage Month into Asian American Pacific Islander Month. The last book that I had on my TBR was The Royal Abduls by Ramzia Shamoon Koya, and we're just keeping Portland, Oregon on the map in this reading group, because this Forest Avenue Press is a Portland, Oregon press, and so I've just read one from an author stationed in Portland, and one this book from a small Oregon press. So this book has a conversation of what it's like to be second or third generation of people who came to the States who are othered, and, or in the case of our protagonists here, who are Indian American, misunderstood by the sort of greater collective culture, or misidentified. In this book, we have a protagonist who is 12 years old. His name is Omar Abdul, and he is really grappling with identity, and trying to figure out what role religion plays, as his family are not religious practitioners but come from a Muslim heritage. What role national identity plays, as he looks brown to everyone, and in his community and is constantly othered, but he is, raised by second generation Indian American father who grew up in Ohio, and a white American mother who grew up in the Northeast, and just all of the confluence of that. And then we have another point of view of his aunt, who is also trying to make sense of what it means to pursue her career and not live up to what she finds as quite oppressive expectations of her family and culture. I have I think this book missed, it could have done a lot more in a lot of ways, but as something that's the conversation about everything I said, especially post-September 11th, it's a very post-September, it's looking at the consequences of September 11th book, although it was published in 2020. This is a great book to read. It was great to have in conversation with Crescent. And I'm also reading The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid Mohsin. Anyway, which I think is another just absolute great book to read in conversation with this book. So I could recommend it. It's not very long for people who like pretty straightforward books and to explore those themes that I just suggested. Moving on to Asian American Heritage Month and to a book that I couldn't say enough glowing remarks about, and I don't know if it's needed by me, but The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong, although it is no On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, which is a book that just knocked me over and impacted me in so many ways. This book is so, I'll just say this book should have got the Pulitzer. If you consider the Pulitzer like the great American novel, this to me is the great American novel. First of all, Ocean Vuong's prose is so luscious and so fantastic. And when you read a book by someone whose craft with prose is on the lockdown, it's noticeable because there are lots of ways to tell stories and people should engage with stories in different ways. But when you get your hands on an author whose craft is just so evident, you can tell the difference. And I can tell the difference reading this book amongst all of the other books I read, which I would and continue to recommend. As I said, this one is standout in so many ways, as far as how Ocean Vuong is able to write. Some of the sentences in here, I had to stop and read multiple times. Some of the even paragraphs in here. This isn't a book club. Otherwise, I would, open up and read a few things, and I don't want to spoil. But if you like to look, speaking of small towns, this book reminds me a bit of also who's in this stack, Fredrik Backman, and the look at how people who are societal misfits come together in community, and how you can have this intricate look at communities who are otherwise in a lot of ways devalued by the greater society. But when you look inside, you see what is seen as the deficit is actually the asset of the individuals inside, and how people get together. The look at community in this, the look at friendship, and oh my gosh, this is such a book of friendship. Yeah. There are times when Ocean Vuong in both of his books can take you into the absolute pit of despair and then lift you back out somehow so tenderly into hope in hopeless places. And who can do that like Ocean Vuong? I'm not sure. Read this book. This is a fantastic read. It is accessible, but because of his relationship with prose, it is also incredibly deep. And it's one of those books that obviously has, a commercial acceptance, but is definitely literary fiction. And I just deeply appreciate books that can bridge those gaps, talk to so many people, make you really explore what it means to be a human, and make you look at other ways of being and knowing, with awe, wonder, and love and curiosity. Read this book. Okay, for the two books that I got to that had been on my TBR for a long time, one is The Power by Naomi Alderman. This was in my backlist of Women's Prize for Fiction. This actually won the Women's Prize for Fiction, I think in 2019, maybe. Anyway, and I've had it. I got this at the Friends of the Library in Portland, maybe last October. I've been fixing to read it for quite some time. I finally got to read it. There were so many things I liked, like the analogy of women actually having electricity as a power, and the threat that like raised as a look at patriarchal oppression and misogyny. I found it very clever. Some of the character development, I'm not so sure. And yeah, I loved this premise. I think Naomi Alderman obviously wrote a prize-winning book. I would have loved to see this premise maybe by an author whose writing craft I myself enjoy more, but there were parts of this book that I found intriguing and interesting. And again, the use of speculative, I thought Naomi really, she nailed that. And I thought it was a fantastic book to read in conversation with this last book, which was Beartown by Fredrik Backman. And Beartown is about a little town. It's about patriarchal oppression, and it's about misogyny, and it's about violence against women that is done not by individuals, but by societies. And so I thought just sort of like looking at these two together was an interesting conversation. I'm a Backman fan. So, well, I am still, is this my favorite Backman book? I don't know. I really do not purposely engage in books that address SA for my own mental well-being. And, Backman told this from a male point of view, and he looked at he looked at the exact same structural problems, serious problems with serious consequences that Naomi Alderman is, and telling it through like the story of hockey, of sports. I'm not a sports book reader, but it reminded me every once in a while. Again, I like to read diversely, and I actually thought that this book was just about a small town in sports, and I thought it was going to be a little bit more like Ocean Vuong's Emperor of Gladness, which is about a small town, and sort of what it's like to grow up in a small dying town. And it is true in that way, but I resonated the sort of themes in this book more with, toxic patriarchal masculinity. And I don't mean like it's toxic to be born or trans into a male. I mean the misogyny of the patriarchy and the ways in which society itself perpetuates it through many, if not most, individuals. So I'm glad I read it. I have the next one, which I don't actually have the physical copy of. I have the winners. I went through this thing where I had the winners, and then I was like, this is part of a trilogy. And I don't even have the first two books, so I'm just going to let the winners go. And then I found this. And so I went and got the winners back out of the little free library where I put it and said, it's okay, I'll put it back. I don't have the second one, so I just put it on hold in my Libby. It's like a month hold or something. So when it comes off hold, I'm still interested in this trilogy, I'll read it. If not, I'll get rid of this and the winners together. And move on to other Fredrik Backman. I have a couple more books that aren't in that trilogy, but this is my year of trilogies. I'm just going to leave by saying my TBR is pretty set. It's the rest of the Asian American Pacific Islander books that I mentioned in the last TBR, but I'm also queuing up Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I just feel like this could be a good book to read now. I actually have it on audio. It came off a couple week hold on audio, so I think I'm gonna make space for it, and I think I have some audio time for it. And then what I'm hoping is to do the Heart the Lover. It just came off hold after a very long time. I'm finishing up the current long list for Women's Prize for Fiction, and Lily King's Heart the Lover is actually on the short list as well. So I kind of wanted and hoped. I've had this also, I got this in Oregon as well. Maybe at the end of last year. So I'm hoping to read the first part of Heart the Lover, then the last part of Heart the Lover, which is kind of the prequel sequel thing that's going on. If I run out of interest reading the first part and not want to read more Lily King and, you know, not read like a giant novel, then I won't do that. Then this will either go back on the shelf or leave if I'm disappointed with Heart the Lover. But that's my plan for this. And that will be kind of my reading week, finishing up that Asian American TBR, reading those 2 Lily King books like that, and finishing up listening to The Last White Man, and then listening to Atmosphere. So until either the next TBR or reading wrap up, happy reading.